Welcome, team. As your school leader, I am absolutely thrilled to share this with you today. Let's just dive right into this explainer. We hear a ton of buzzwords in education, right? But Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is definitely not a passing trend. It's a highly researched framework built directly on the science of how humans actually learn. So today, we're not going to look at UDL as some abstract theory. We're looking at it as a highly practical, everyday guide for our daily lesson planning and our classroom culture.
Here's our roadmap for our time together today. We'll start with our vision for expert learners, break down a few common UDL myths, look at designing for agency, audit our lesson plans, and finally, figure out how to measure our UDL fidelity.
All right, Section 1, breaking down UDL myths.
Before we get too far, it's time to reframe what UDL actually is. Because a super common myth out there is that it just means, adding laptops to a lesson, or differentiating only for students with IEPs. But the reality? UDL is proactive, intentional design for all learners. It completely assumes that learner variability is the norm, not some rare exception. This is for absolutely every student in our building.
Moving right along to Section 2, our vision for expert learners. Ultimately, we want to create what we call expert learners. We need to connect every single UDL checkpoint back to this one primary end goal, developing purposeful, reflective, and resourceful student agency. You see, according to the newly updated CAST UDL Guidelines 3.0, this entire framework isn't just about kids accessing information. It's really about building the emotional and cognitive capacity of the student so they can step up and take true ownership of their own learning. Take a look at this map from the CAST UDL Guidelines. It really brilliantly illustrates the pathways to our goal by focusing on engagement, representation, and action and expression. Basically, the why, the what, and the how of learning. Now notice how the columns move vertically here. They go from simply providing access at the top to building skills in the middle to ultimately helping students internalize these behaviors. That bottom row? That is exactly where the magic happens. That's where we see purposeful, resourceful, and strategic goal-directed learners.
Okay, on to Section 3, designing for agency.
So, providing multiple means of engagement is often misunderstood as just, making a lesson entertaining. But when you look at these checkpoints, it's so much deeper than that. By intentionally nurturing joy, play, and collaboration, we actually foster a deep sense of belonging. And that belonging helps our students engage far more deeply with complex course material. When we build an inclusive community culture that truly values diverse identities, we are literally priming the brain's affective networks to take on big academic challenges.
But here's the thing, we also have to take deliberate steps to challenge exclusionary practices, and we do this through deliberate goal setting and restorative strategies. The UDL 3.0 guidelines actually place a massive emphasis on addressing biases and threats. So in our daily routines, this means actively cultivating empathy and promoting both individual and collective reflection. It really means looking hard at our curriculum and asking, okay, who is represented here? And honestly, who is missing?
By optimizing choice and autonomy, we're basically inviting students to organize information, build their own long-term goals, and nurture their purposeful agency. When we give a student a choice in how they perceive information, like maybe offering a text, an audio recording, or a hands-on model, we absolutely are not lowering the bar. Actually, we're giving them the authentic tools they need to figure out exactly how they learn best.
Which brings us to Section 4, auditing our lesson plans.
So, the crucial point is figuring out how we translate all these big ideas into our daily instructional objectives. Well, we can use a highly practical template, an SEL and UDL organizer mapped across the classroom, school, family, and community domains. This framework is fantastic because it helps us integrate social-emotional learning standards directly into our academic blocks, all through the lens of universal design.
We can use this specific framework to step right through our daily routines and make sure we're proactively designing activities that support the acquisition, generalization, and maintenance of skills. Because, as the research points out, we might teach a skill perfectly in our classroom, right? But we really have to ask ourselves, does that skill survive the total chaos of the school lunchroom? And how can families actually support this at home?
By just plugging a specific standard right into this matrix, you can immediately identify gaps in accessibility and plan how to honor diverse methods of response. Let's say, for example, the standard is demonstrating knowledge of personal strengths. You can look at the action and expression row and honestly ask yourself, am I providing multiple tools for students to communicate their strengths, or am I accidentally putting up a massive barrier by only allowing a written essay? Finally, let's look at Section 5, measuring our UDL fidelity.
Now, I want to be super clear. We are not doing this for summative judgments. Instead, we're going to use the UDL observation measurement tool to help us identify implementation gaps so we can continually improve. This tool, often called the UDL OMT, is designed precisely for practitioners to gauge where their learning environments currently stand. It fully acknowledges that UDL design is an iterative process. It's continually changing based on the specific context of your learners. This tool uses a simple 0 to 3 scale, and what's really fascinating here is the difference between a 2 and a 3. A level 2 means, hey, UDL is happening, but it's still heavily teacher-directed. Our ultimate goal, a level 3, shows true student agency. That's where learners are independently utilizing multiple strategies to customize their very own learning experience. It's totally dynamic and interactive. So, when we audit our own classrooms, we're going to be looking at the real nuts and bolts of our daily routines. Things like how we introduce and frame new material, how we represent content, how students express their understanding, and of course, their overall activity and engagement. We want to see if we're clarifying vocabulary and symbols during our content delivery, and if we are truly honoring varied methods for students to navigate their work and show us what they know.
Because true fidelity really means we're successfully helping students monitor their own progress toward becoming those expert learners we envisioned at the very start of this explainer. Think about it. If students don't know how they're doing, there's no way they can strategically plan for their own challenges. We absolutely have to offer action-oriented feedback that helps them build their own coping skills.
And as the field test data of this tool shows, most classrooms naturally start right there in the emergent phase. Implementing UDL is an iterative journey of continuous design, guys. It's definitely not an overnight fix. Almost half of the classrooms in the initial studies showed emergent UDL. And you know what? That is exactly where the growth happens. We just take a snapshot, we reflect, and we adjust for the next lesson. So, as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a challenge. I challenge you to reflect on your own routines. Where do your lessons land on the UDL scale right now? And what is one single exclusionary practice you can challenge tomorrow? Let's take this blueprint, let's really lean on one another for collective learning, and let's design a truly transformative experience for every single learner in our building. Thank you so much for diving into this with me.